Amen. I want to welcome everybody to this afternoon's question and answer session on courtship and marriage. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. For the following 3 Sabbaths, give you the dates. That's the 12th, the 19th, and the 26th of September, which is the next 3 Sabbaths. I won't be doing a question and answer. And the reason for that is that the next 3 weekends, I'm actually going to be participating in some Zoom camp meetings. I don't know if they've been advertised or not. I don't know if they will be advertised or not. But for the next 3 weekends, I'll be doing some Zoom camp meetings. The first one is targeted at Africa. The second one is second weekend, which is the 19th, is targeted at Oceania. And the last one is targeted at the Americas. So it's Africa, Oceania, and America, if we can just think of those 3 continents. I know in each continent there are various time zones. I appreciate that. But just to let you know that for the next 3 weekends, we won't be doing these Q&As. So then that will bring us into October. And I guess by the end of September, we'll make a decision if we're going to carry on with these questions or we move on. I haven't made that decision yet. I'll see what the feedback is. I know that some people are tiring of the Q&As on courtship and others are finding them a continued blessing. So we haven't made a decision on what to do yet. So, but I will let you know. Just another point of interest for those of you who are interested. This morning, that's this morning UK time, we had a Sabbath school presentation that was done via Zoom. It was recorded, and the subject that we addressed was methodology. So we had a 1-hour presentation on methodology, and that was done this morning. If you're interested in watching that, it will get uploaded sometime in the future, sometime in the near future. And for those of you who are interested, that was actually a bilingual translation. So for those of you who didn't listen to the presentations, if you do watch it, we'd appreciate your feedback to see how well that worked for you, if it was okay. So pretty much done with the housekeeping now, and we'll begin with our study. So my first question is the following. There's a couple, they're obviously married, and one of the spouses seems to have given up the faith. They haven't left the movement, but they have stopped studying. Both of them are priests. Both have been baptized. And there's some issue between them that they've got to a place where they cannot discuss one another, and they cannot understand one another, and they cannot any longer discuss doctrinal issues. You may be surprised, but this is I don't want to say a frequent problem, but it's not uncommon. There are a number of people that I know personally in the movement spouses that are in this situation, that for some reason, one of the spouses has basically mentally, emotionally disconnected themselves from the movement. They're still in the movement, they haven't left, but they're no longer studying anymore. They often will say that they've lost interest or they cannot understand. They'll give some kind of reason or pretext for it, but essentially they're no longer participating in the activities of the movement. Besides this, everything else is fine, which often is not as true as some people make it appear to be. They say everything's fine besides this, but it often is not. Everything is not fine, even though the questioner says that it is. They're living with each other. They have no desire to separate, but they're not in harmony anymore about the message. And what advice can we give to such a couple? So I'm not sure if the questioner is the one who is studying or the one who is not studying. I'm assuming it's the one that's studying, the one who we would normally think is remained faithful, strong in the message, and now they're asking what advice can be given. So this is an age-old problem, not only that confronts this movement, that's confronted God's people right from its very inception. What happens when a couple are together, they are one in the faith, and then one of them decides to basically either not leave the faith directly, but essentially leaves the faith because they have lost their faith or their belief in what's being taught. Unfortunately, I don't believe there's much that can really be done for them unless they are willing to talk, unless they're willing to express why they have this concern, why they have reached the position that they're no longer willing or prepared to study or to communicate with their spouse. There's very little that can be done. The worry that I have for many of us in the movement, I've expressed it this way. In the past, when people were not happy with this movement, they would tend to leave. Today, I have the fear that many brethren and sisters have left the movement mentally, but they haven't left bodily. It's a bit of an unusual situation because we've not really had this kind of behavior in the past, at least in this way, at least from my recollection. So it seems to me that this person has left the movement, but they, for whatever reason, are not prepared to actually be open about that and leave bodily. They've just left mentally. Besides praying, besides trying to encourage the person, I think if we can get friends or elders involved, someone who may be able to have an influence on this person, I don't think there's actually much that can be done for the person, to be honest, except to, as I said, just try to give them time and space to minister to them and hope that they can be won back. But I think the most important thing is to try to understand what has gone wrong in that person's experience, why they have no longer engaged in proper participation in this movement. Somewhere along the line in their experience, something has gone wrong. We do know that one of the big issues that confronts us at the moment is this, what Elder Tess called in a recent presentation, false freedom, which was presented on the 19th of August. This idea of false freedom is something that has really taken hold of this movement in a way that has surprised people and is causing a lot of problems much more than we might really think. I would recommend that everybody watch that presentation if you have not watched it. It's a two-part series. It was done on the 19th of August, and it's a really important study. It's one of the landmark studies that has been done in this dispensation. That's the importance that I would place upon that study if someone were to ask me. Next question. This is a similar question. How does one work on their relationship when the other partner doesn't want to communicate or make the friendship or marriage work? There's no infidelity involved. People often put that clause in at the end when addressing issues like this. They'll say, ... things are bad, but there's no infidelity involved. And they use that statement, I think, often to indicate that things are not serious. I would argue that physical infidelity or a complete breakdown in a relationship, such as is being portrayed here, that the person doesn't want to communicate or have a friendship to make the marriage work, to weigh up the two to ask which one is worse, I don't think it's that straightforward. To basically shut down in your marriage so that you have no mind-to-mind relationship is as bad, in some ways is worse than actual adultery or infidelity. Because at least with infidelity, most of us can put a grasp upon that. We can wrap our minds around how infidelity works. We can contain it. But this lack of minds meeting, where people, a couple, two spouses, are not able to communicate and they don't have any desire to communicate and make the marriage work, I think that kind of relationship is more dangerous in many ways than the problem of infidelity. Because infidelity, being a physical act, is immeasurable. It has a better feel to it. It's the common problem that happens even in the medical system. I'm sure most of us, if you're particularly in one of I think it happens in most countries, developed or underdeveloped countries, is that mental health problems are not treated in the same way that physical problems are. There seems to be something with society that causes a stigma to occur when someone has a mental condition as opposed to a physical one. If someone had broken their leg, people would be sympathetic. Or if you had diabetes or you had something wrong with your liver, something that you could identify, people are sympathetic. But when it comes to a mental health condition, often people are unsympathetic. It's an underfunded part of our health system. It's often a taboo subject, and people really don't want to talk about mental health conditions. In fact, recently, there was an article I saw that insurance companies who offered life insurance are beginning to ask a question about a person's mental condition in a way that it wasn't asked before. And people who are admitting to just feeling stressed because of COVID-19, they're seeing their insurance premiums rise because of this. Now, people have got to a place where, because it's in the media now, are scared to actually either get treatment for stress or to even tell their insurance company that they're feeling stressed because of a hike in insurance premiums. This is just indicative of our whole perspective in society of not wanting to deal with mental conditions. So when it talks about how does one deal with a relationship that's got to this problem, I've focused an awful amount on this one area in the studies that we've been doing recently, which is the issue of attachment. It's a field of psychology called attachment psychology or attachment theory. And I think it's in complete agreement with inspiration. It's the idea or the model, the concept that each of us, our primary foundational need is to be loved or to have affection or to feel needed. And I suspect the person who's asked this question, if they're speaking about themselves, that what's actually happened is there has been a parting of ways mentally, emotionally, between this person and their spouse, which is causing this problem of them not being able to communicate. And whilst it may seem that the reason for this is that the person may be gone off the movement or there's a problem with them, often this is a two-way issue, a two-way problem. And while I would never condone adultery, while I would not trivialize the sin of adultery, I would say for the majority of couples, if infidelity has occurred, if adultery has happened, often the driver or the foundational reason for this is that this person is not receiving or feeling loved in their relationship. And because we're all, I'll say it this way, I don't mean to say it in a vulgar fashion, because we're all pleasure seekers, they will seek for pleasure outside of marriage. I'm not saying that to condone it or to lessen the sin of adultery. And when I said pleasure, I mean it in a theological or doctrinal way, not in an emotional or passionate way. I'm not saying we just want some pleasure for a season. This is a drive that all of us have to feel loved, that we need to be loved. That's why we have such a drive to be married. And I have brought this up again, but I always want to repeat things 2 or 3 times so people really begin to get it. The reason why people are having so many problems in first finding a partner, and then when they are in a relationship, to maintain that relationship, the reason people struggle so much, there are a number of reasons. So I want to offer one important one, and that is the following. Society as a whole has broken down. Our family relationships, parents, siblings, cousins, uncles, we really don't have those relationships in the same way that society used to have it. We've moved away often because of work commitments. Some people have emigrated to different countries, and we don't have the same family and social ties that people used to have in former generations. If you're over 50, I'm sure if you recall back to your own childhood, you'll see that it was much more family orientated than things are today. And because so many of us have got these dysfunctional relationships with the extended families, this drives us to a place where I'm going to use the word expect, we expect our spouse, this newly found person that's entered into our lives, to fill the role of all of those people that are no longer in your life. And it's a tall order to fill. And it's so tall an order, almost no one can fill that role. And therefore people feel that their relationship suffers or their spouse doesn't meet their needs. And the reality is it's not that your spouse is not meeting your needs. It's just that you're asking too much of your spouse because you're not having your needs met by other close relationships, which more often than not would be parents and siblings, cousins, would be close family. Because most of us don't have close family to support us, we turn to our spouses and expect them to do far more than I would say that they're capable of doing. Just understanding that, I think, can help us to cope and deal with much of the stress and strain that we find ourselves in. Even though I'm not giving any strategies to actually work through those problems, just knowing that as a fact, I think, can be helpful. I think it's important to understand that, especially when people are courting and they find it so difficult. Often I think we expect too much from those people who we wanted to join together in faith with. Next question. How does one rekindle a friendship or marriage that has seemed to dwindle? So this is a follow-up question from the one that we've had before. And I'm going to say it's relatively simple. At least the theory is. You just have to love them. Loving someone is not that easy. It means constant giving, which is one problem. And the other problem is actually trying to understand how to love them, to understand their needs. Now, there are many self-help books, much self-help material that's available on the internet. And I'm not by any means recommending this one in, to say this is a really super great resource or this is the one that everybody needs. But it does have its uses, and I think is functional. And I think many of us have heard it. Perhaps some of you have tried it. It's called the Five Love Languages by, I think, someone called Chapman, if I recall his surname. And what this person does, it's almost like if you're in the conference church, if you came from that system, people would do spiritual gift questionnaires to find out what your spiritual gifts are, what kind of person you are, so you could find a role in the church. All of these are psychologically based questionnaires, which do serve a purpose. And this author has developed a questionnaire. It's available on the internet. He has many books on the subject. So you can go through this and you can discover what kind of a person you are, and also what kind of a person your spouse is, or your potential spouse. And you can do this with many relationships. You can do it with your children, you can do it with your siblings, you can do it with your work colleagues. It's not the be all and end all of relationships or understanding people, but it is helpful to get a broad brush understanding of how you tick, how you operate, and how they do. What undergirds this principle, this concept, this idea, which Chapman doesn't focus on particularly, is this idea that what really drives us, what really makes and motivates each of us, is this idea that each of us need to be loved. And I've spoken about this, as I say, extensively, that when we transition from childhood to youth to adulthood, human beings tend to get further and further away from one another, especially men. When they go from boys to teenagers to adulthood, they are trained through so many sources, some subtle, some overt, that basically tells them that, I don't know if you're familiar with the word wimp or weak, or all those kind of epitaphs that basically say it's a sign of weakness to expect to be loved, or to show emotion, to even talk about the fact that you need physical help, or you need to be loved, or you need someone to just touch you or caress you or say something kind. Sorry, I tried to slow down. That was just for the translators. I've just taken a pause. So I think there are tools that are available to help us to be able to rekindle our friendship or our marriage, to rekindle that love. But it has to be built, I think, upon an understanding and acknowledgement that we never grow out of the desire or the need to be loved. What can confuse people or throw them is the idea that because a person is hard, I don't know if you can conceptualize this, we would say this person is really a tough person. They've got a hard heart, or they're hardened and they're unlovable. You may know someone like that. Your spouse may have those attributes. What I want to say to you is, if you are dealing with someone like that, not to believe it. It's not true that someone is hardened to the degree that they don't need human companionship and human love. Those people who say they prefer their own company, they prefer to be by themselves, have either a clinical mental condition, or they have been, is, for the vast majority of cases, the real issue is that they have been hurt or damaged sometimes in their life, and they are unsure of how to have a normal relationship. And that's the vast majority of people. They don't have a mental condition. There's not something wrong with them that they're unable to develop relationships with people. They don't have Asperger's or autism. They're just normal people who have been so hurt or damaged that they don't know how to express the fact that they need to be loved. And that should be your first assumption, that this person is normal, nothing wrong with them, and they just need to be loved, even if they seem unloving. There are self-help books that I've mentioned, but sometimes they only can go a certain way. Adventists have got two problems. One of them is that we tend not to want to spend money, and the other is that we tend to be self-reliant. And both of those are problematic, because for many of us, professional counseling, professional help is something that is not only available, but I think is really, really useful. And I spoke about this last week as well, that there are people in the movement who can help, who do know how to assist and help people in relationship problems. But the issue is that even those people who have a knowledge of what to do tend not to have enough experience, because it's not a full-time job. They haven't been doing this for very long, compared to a professional counselor who may have been doing it for 5-10 years, and they may have met hundreds of people who they have supported and helped. So they have a vast wealth of experience. You know, there aren't that many variations to the theme, and most of us are not as unique as we like to think. The Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. The Bible also says this temptation that has overcome you is a common problem. It's nothing unique. There are very few unique problems. Anything that you are confronting, you can be sure that there are people right now who are being confronted with the same issues and the same problems. So that's what I would recommend in how to rekindle a marriage if it seems to have dwindled. We need to recognize that both parties are at fault, something has gone wrong, and we need to rekindle that relationship. And often you will need professional help. And if not professional help, perhaps help from someone in the movement who has some level of experience in counseling or helping people. Next question. What is the appropriate way to involve God in our relationships? I'm not sure what the questioner here is expecting in this answer. I mean, the obvious one is that we should involve God in all of our decision-making processes. We should have family worship together to involve God at that level. I think in any decision-making process, we should both spouses should be involving God in any decision that they make. Of course, one of the most important things in this area is actually reading inspiration together that deals with these kind of issues, so that God can be directly involved and assist you, not only through your prayer life, but also your study life. Next question. What should a person, this is person A, do when they want to court another person, person B, but person B has never thought about person A in that way? So let me try to reframe the question as I understand it. Person A and person B know each other. I presume they have some relationship, probably a friendship. Person A is attracted to person B, but there's no indication that person B is attracted to person A. So the question is, what should person A do? I've dealt with how to start up relationships and my thoughts about what should happen before courtship begins, but I'll just quickly reiterate that. I think it's important for people to get to know one another, to be friends with one another at an early stage before they would enter into courtship, before they would enter into marriage. And often 12 to 18 months as friends, getting to know somebody is a really good time frame before you would approach a person. So I'm assuming in this situation that that's what's happened. These two people know each other, they're friends, and person B has not thought about person A in a romantic way, but person A, I guess over time, begins to think this way. The question is, what should person A do? Ask the person out. I think they should go and approach the person and say, I like you. Now, there's various ways of doing that. There's various ways of asking a person. You can go and ask the person directly. You can approach their parents. You can approach their friend. You can approach, I'll just call it an elder, but it could be someone spiritual in the church who's a mutual friend, hopefully, maybe not a mutual friend, but someone of reputation. You can go through a second party, basically, if you don't want to approach them directly. I think it depends on a number of things: where you live, how old you are, how long you've known the person. So I don't want to be overly prescriptive about how you actually do that initial move. But my advice would be, if you like somebody, go ahead and tell them. There are a couple of caveats to that. One, that you've known this person for some time. And the way this question is portrayed, this person is inferring that they do know the person for some time. So what I'm saying is, you don't just know somebody who you've seen on video or something. There's a teacher in Africa and you've seen them present a number of times. You like them, you never really met them, you don't know them, and you then would say, well, I like this person, but they don't really like me, I don't know them. And there's to ask them to enter into a courtship. I wouldn't recommend that. That would be a good approach to take. Rather, I would suggest that you should get to know somebody first, and once you've known them for some time, and my advice tends to be 12 to 18 months, just as a friendship, then if you either began to like them because you never romantically, because you never at first did, or you've continued to like them romantically and that feeling has strengthened, then you would approach them. So I don't think there's anything wrong to approach somebody because you really don't know what they're thinking. Next question, related. How to approach the person you like? Should you do it directly or first go to the elder? If so, will the elder tell the person? Do we still have to ask the parents first in the dispensation of equality? So I think you have all of those options, and I've mentioned them already. You can go and ask the person directly. You can go and first ask an elder what they think about it. Doesn't necessarily have to be an elder. It can be someone that you have confidence in spiritually. What would the elder do or the person do? I guess depends on the situation, but more likely than not, they will work on your behalf and approach the person, or they will tell you that you should approach the person. Either way, the person would be approached. I suspect more often than not, if the person you're speaking to thinks it's a good idea, they'll speak on your behalf. Do we still have to ask parents first? I see no reason why the fifth commandment and the way we've understood it before should be done away with, that is now null and void. Can't understand why that would be, why we wouldn't seek advice and counsel and even permission from parents. What I would say is, depending on a person's perspective, because some people will have already done this, both sets of parents would and should be asked, both the boys and the girls, and both of their responses, I'm saying, should be respected. So I see no problem in asking parents. I think it's a good idea to do that. If you like a person, ask them. They may say yes. Next question. Are we able to go to Bible workers for counsel if there are no elders? You can go to anybody. They don't have to have a position in the movement. They can just be a wise person, a mature sister, a young brother who has his head on straight. Anybody that you have confidence in. No problem asking Bible workers. We have a great amount of confidence in our Bible workers. Next question. Do people in leadership positions need approval of the elders of the person that they would like to court? So this is an interesting question. So I'll pick on Elder Tess because he's not here. So does Elder Tess need the permission of Elder Shaquetta before she would court somebody? I don't know what people think about that. I'm hoping from the way that you heard how I responded to the previous questions, that this question has really already been answered. And it's really in the one word. I don't know if you picked it up here in this sentence. We could do William Miller's rules to try to understand what is the most important question. Most important word in this question. And I would say it's approval. It's not elder. So I don't think the issue of elder is what's really important, or the leader, but it's approval? What does it mean to require or need approval? Does anybody actually need approval from anyone else to enter into a relationship, to marry? And I think the honest and frank answer is they don't need anyone's approval. They don't even need their parental approval. Everybody's free to do what they want. Now, if you don't seek for approval or you don't receive approval, I'm pretty sure that there are consequences for that. And I don't mean that in a really harsh or negative way, but there are consequences if you don't seek for approval. One of them is that you can get yourself into a big mess. If you were to ask someone, well, what do you think about this? And they would say, I don't think it's a good idea. And you go ahead, you can get yourself into trouble because you didn't follow wise counsel. But this idea that you need to have approval, I think is a false idea. And whilst I don't want to minimize seeking counsel from those in either a leadership position, or your parents, or someone wise, whoever it is, while I wouldn't want to minimize seeking advice, what I do want to say is that we don't actually need approval, in the sense that if someone were to ask me, I'm one of the leaders in the movement, and if a couple came up to me and said, we're interested in entering into courtship, I would say, well, I don't think it's a very good idea. And you don't have, if I were to say my blessing, you don't have my approval. What would happen if they went ahead anyway? Would they be disfellowshipped, reprimanded, punished in some way? The answer is not really. No, that wouldn't happen. All that would happen is that I think they would have a sense of regret by moving forward in a way that I think would cause them heartache. And in that situation, if I were them, I'd want to know why this approval is not being given, and if it's not given for a valid reason, to accept that and not to move forward. So whilst I think it's important to get approval, if that's the right way of saying it, I don't think it's mandatory or legal that it has to happen, that you can't marry without approval. Next question. How do we look for the right partner? Let me say it this way in a provocative fashion. Don't set your standards too high. Don't expect too much. Often our expectations are so high, we cannot find people who will meet those expectations. And so when you're looking, you'll say, you know what, there aren't any people suitable for me. So I think that's one of the problems. We've set our standards too high. And what I mean by that is on a number of levels. I'm not saying we shouldn't be careful. Of course we should. But I've already alluded to this, that we expect too much from people nowadays. And the reason we expect too much is, I don't know if you're familiar with a Swiss Army knife. It's a little pocket knife that isn't just the blade. It's got all these little bits and pieces connected to it. It's multi-purpose. We expect our partners to fulfill too many roles for us that often they're not able or qualified to do. And it sets us up for a really difficult marriage. And so when the question asks, what should we look for in the right person? Don't look for too much. I think we expect too much. Secondly, we're driven by a culture, this is across the world, where physical beauty is a powerful driver for choosing somebody. And I think this can cause real problems in being able to find someone that's right for you. In fact, it wasn't so long ago, I get asked the question reasonably frequently, am I interested in entering into a relationship, in entering into a marriage? And the question wasn't framed that way. I don't think they even let me answer the question, or they may have done, or it was the following question, and they said, "Oh, what's your type?" And I said, half jokingly, because everybody knows what that means, like, "What do you mean my type? Like, I prefer humans." And they said, no, you know what I mean, your type, like blonde or brunette. And you can immediately see how crazy that is, because what about if I had liked or I thought about a Chinese woman? I don't think, I'm not saying it never happens, but genetically Chinese people aren't blonde. Or if I had said, well, I quite I quite like a black sister or a sister from Africa or something like that. And I can't remember who the questioner was, where they're from, because I don't think they were a white. I don't think it was a white person. I think it was a person of color. I can't 100% remember. But it's just interesting that people have this idea when they talk about the right partner, what's your type, that people gravitate to this idea of, well, is it a blonde or brunette or something like that, or redhead? And the reason they do that is because we're driven in this society, in the world, by outward attraction. Now, last week, or maybe the week before, I did say that we do need to pay special attention to our physical bodies, how we look. I think it's far more important than we give it credence as Christians, because we'll say, well, the most important thing actually is a person's character or their mind. And I just don't buy into that. I don't actually believe that it's true. I don't think we're built that way. I'm not saying that only beautiful people can marry. I am saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I am saying that a woman can find a range of men attractive, different heights, different builds, different complexions. They could find a number of partners. I think somewhere in these questions, if it's not already been asked, it tends to be asked. Actually, I think it may have been last week. Is there a special person for me? And the answer is no. There is no one person out of these 7 billion that God ordained should be your special chosen one. I just don't believe that that's the case. I don't see any model for that. I don't see any wisdom in that. And I just don't think it's a correct approach to have. Time and chance, providence, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, indicates that, you know, you can meet someone. You might call it providence, I might call it, you know, a random encounter, and you could either hit it off or you may not. And if you're in a different place a year later or in a different time, you could be attracted to another person who is really completely different, many different attributes. So when we talk about the right partner, I don't think there is one right particular partner. I think we have to be careful that our expectations are not too high. I think we should be careful of how we deal with someone's physical appearance, their body. I think it's more important than we admit to, but I don't think there is one right body type for any one person. We can all have our personal preferences, but even in those preferences, if we found somebody who we might think is not our personal preference, we could fall in love with them because a person is something, it's a being that is holistic. There's mind, spirit, and body. And there's a lot of flexibility between those three. There's lots of variables, and you might think that you only like a certain body type or a certain skin tone or hair color. But if you meet someone who is absolutely stunning, just even mentally, who is a different skin color or hair color, you can be perfectly satisfied, happy with them. So looking for someone who's the right partner. Obviously, you find someone that you have a common interest. That's really important. I think that you should seek for things that you enjoy doing together, that you both be in the movement, etc. Your perspective of them should be right. You should consult widely with friends. That's how I think you should find the right partner. Often it takes time, which is why I really recommend that you get to know somebody for a good length of time before you venture out and propose to enter into a courtship. 12 to 18 months is a good time. If they live relatively close and you meet them in the flesh, it's important. Oh, I was speaking to somebody earlier today, and they mentioned to me a study that they had come across, which was about loneliness. And what they had, what this research had indicated to them was that when people are lonely, giving them a phone call often is not enough. What people need, if they are particularly lonely, is not just to hear the words or the voice, they also need to see the face. So often some kind of video interaction, video call, video messaging can really make a big difference. It's far better than just speaking.
So final question from the previous one.
So the question is, in response to approaching the person that you like or you love, I'm just going to go with like. I'm not sure how much you can love a person before you even approach them. And my question is, does it mean that the person approaching should automatically feel that his or her request will be met? Is there room to say no to that request based upon your own reasons, of course, that you can clearly explain to the next person, even if that person is simply, even if the reason is simply because you don't have the same feelings as him or her? I think the answer is yes. You do not have to say, of course, I have to say yes to that person. You're quite within your rights to say no. And more than that, you don't even have to give a reason. Sometimes you may desire to give a reason, but there's no pressure for you to say why. And in fact, if you have asked somebody and you can tell that the answer is no, to put pressure upon them to find out why, I don't think is the right way to approach things. You should give the person the freedom and the space just to say no. And I don't think there should be any expectation to say, well, can you give me feedback of why you don't? This is not a performance review. The person is under no obligation to tell you why they don't want to move ahead, why they don't like you. And to put that kind of pressure on someone, I don't think is correct. So I would counsel people not to push why they have been spurned. I'm not saying they can't ask, because there may be whatever reasons given may help them to be able to understand better. They may be able to address that issue. But if the person is reticent to say, they don't have to say why. Next question. How do you respond to somebody who approaches you and you do not like them? How do you let them down politely? So I think I've answered that question. So whoever asked me this question on the spot. I already answered it. How do you respond to someone you approach, you don't like them, you just tell them, I don't like you, or I'm not interested, or depending on how polite you want to be, just say, I'm not ready to marry, I don't want to get into a relationship, I'm not there in my life. I think you have to be careful if you start giving what in the UK is called a politically correct answer, which means you don't give an honest answer. You can get yourself into trouble because a person who's pursuing you may not take that kind of a no for an answer, which I think is wrong for them to do, but they may have a force of personality and may say, well, why? What's the problem? Instead of just taking no. So I think it's probably helpful if you can just say, no, I'm not interested. And if they say why, you don't have to say because you're ugly or because you don't smell nice or to be offensive. You can speak in a winsome, nice way, but try to be as honest as you can whilst not meaningfully hurting somebody. Next question. What do I do when there is a person I have liked, but I did not tell the person that I like them? Bad mistake. But now, this is an interesting one, but now they have entered into a courtship. What shall I do? Shall I say something to them or should I not say something to them? So let me reframe the question so we understand. This is a love triangle. Love triangles are never good. A brother and a sister. They've known each other for a while. They like each other. They approach one another. They agree that there is more than friendship and they enter into a courtship. That's all good. There's a third person who was the friend of one of those people who are now in the courtship. They've been a friend for a while and they really like the person, but for some reason, they never asked them. There could be two reasons for that. One, that they were a sister and they didn't think that they were allowed to ask. Second, they were just too scared to ask. So what should the person do now? Now, we've had this question for quite a while, and we have wrestled with this question. This is the royal we, me and my friends, my counselors, and we came to the conclusion, if it's quite early in the courtship, this third person should go and ask the person that they like and tell them, by the way, just want to let you know, I know you're in a courtship, but it's not that I want to wreck your courtship or I want to cause you any harm or distress, but I've liked you for a long time and either I was too scared to tell you or I'm a sister and you and I both know that I wasn't allowed to tell you that I liked you in the past, but now I'm allowed to, or now I'm aware that I can do that. I'm telling you now, and there you go. We appreciate, perhaps not everybody would agree with that. We appreciate that it could be very hurtful and painful. But courtship is not a commitment. Courtship is entering into a relationship where two people are making a statement to one another that they want to get to know each other before they marry. Now, if this courtship has been going on for any length of time, I think it's then problematic to make that kind of proposition. So I think a a person would have to be very careful about, I'll say it this way, in interfering in a courtship in that way. But I think there may be a place for that in a certain circumstance, if for some reason there were reasons why that person didn't have the courage or didn't make the move to approach the person in the first place. I think there may be a place in this situation where counsel should be sought. I think that might be a way to mitigate the circumstances. Often there are people who are aware of the relationship, and they could perhaps give better advice on what to do or what not to do. So this is a very difficult and painful situation that that is being addressed here, and I don't think it should be considered lightly on how to deal with this situation. So I think I've tried to address that question as best as I can. How to behave after ending the courtship. If a couple courted for a length of time, a lengthy time of period, lengthy to me would sound like 12 months, and one of the party has come to see that this will not work out and it ends the courtship, how should the two people act after the courtship, especially if one party still likes the other one? So you've been courting for some length of time. This person says a lengthy time period. To me, that sounds like around 12 months. So it's a fully matured courtship. You begin to realize, actually, this is a mistake, that you don't like this person in the sense of marrying them, and you want out. So you've ended the courtship. What happens after that? I think there is absolutely no reason why you could not maintain your friendship, but it depends on the circumstances. I think as best as you could, it would be nice to maintain your friendship, but it may not always be possible. Now, I just want to add something. It says, especially if one party still likes the other one. And I just want to comment on that. So you have a couple, this person, they both liked each other at the beginning, obviously. Now they've drawn further apart. It's been a lengthy period, 12 months. This person now is saying, when they look at their partner, actually, I don't like them that much with respect to marrying. So they say, I want to break up the relationship, and this person is left by themselves. Now, if this courtship had been handled properly through this lengthy time period, I'm saying this statement, this decision should not come as a surprise. It shouldn't come as a surprise to say, oh, I want to break off the relationship. I think if things have got so bad that a person wants to walk, the person who is on the receiving end of this statement should be aware of this long before the words are spoken. If they were blind to what's happened, there was something seriously wrong with that courtship, with that relationship, and I would suggest it should never have gone forward, and the right decision is to have broken the relationship and ended it. If there is so little communication, if there is so little empathy or speaking to one another, that one person can just walk away and the other person doesn't know why, there is something seriously wrong in that relationship. So I'm going to say, the questioner says, if one person still likes the other party, they may still like them, but if they were not aware that there was something seriously wrong in this relationship and the person had contemplated leaving, then that relationship was already doomed to failure. They should have been aware. There should have been telltale signs. There should have been communication. They must have had a discussion that things were not going right. Now, there may be one of the couple who says, despite that's all gone wrong, I still want to try to have a go. I still want to make something of this. That's one thing. but I don't think it's a tenable situation that one of the spouses doesn't know what's going on. And the other thing I want to add, most people who are already married and there's infidelity in that marriage, they commit adultery, someone, the victim may protest and say, well, that came as that was a complete surprise. How did that happen? I didn't see it coming. I think if they were to go into counseling, both of them were willing and able to go into counseling afterwards, and they were to explore their relationship, on a proper fashion, they would see that the telltale signs of the breakdown in the relationship were there to be seen, and I'm suggesting relatively easily. Except for a very few situations, and there are some that are just pure abusive relationships. The vast majority of infidelity happens because the marriage has broken down, and the breakdown of marriage, more often than not, takes both parties to activate. Now, there is abuse, of course, and in situations of abuse, the dynamics are different. Next question. Unhappy marriage. If my marriage is not well because of inequality or having chosen the wrong partner, can the couple separate and marry again someone different? So I spoke last week, I think it was, about divorce. Now, divorce and separation, for me, in my vernacular, in my language, is exactly the same thing. There's no difference between divorce and separation, except divorce is a legal separation. And if a couple truly separate, I tend to recommend that they do divorce, so that you are afforded the legal protection that you need. If you have children involved, the children have legal protection. If there's money involved, depending on what side of the argument you are on, there's legal protection for money as well. So I think it's important to get a divorce if you're going to separate. Now, the secondary point is, if you divorce for situation other than death or adultery, can you remarry? And all I want to say at this juncture is my understanding is that you cannot remarry if the grounds of divorce are, I think in the UK, the term is irreconcilable differences. In plain language, that means you don't get along with one another. And the second one is abuse. If you have suffered in the hands of a spouse that isn't treating you well, but there is no infidelity, and at the moment, my understanding is you cannot remarry. Our understanding develops, and if in God's order we see new light on the subject, we will move forward with that light. But as I currently understand it, the only grounds for remarriage are infidelity, basically, or death. Next question. I want to know if it is right to talk about sex during courtship. My response to this is relatively blunt and straightforward. It is not only right to talk about it, it's necessary. The sooner, the better. And I don't mean by that on day one. I think there's a time and a place to talk about sex. But it can be done in a really negative or hurtful way. It can be done in a very silly and foolish way. Most people, I think, are very reticent to talk about sex and how it operates, what people's perspectives on it are. Um, I think they're unnecessarily cautious about doing it. I think it's a part of our humanity, and I think it's only right and proper to talk about it. It's right and proper to talk about birth care or contraception. It's right and proper to talk about a person's position on whether they want children in marriage and how rigid they are about that. And also, if a person has been in a relationship before, how serious that relationship was, something about their past life. So I think to talk about sex in that broader term is important. Next question. Why is sex outside of the confines of a marriage wrong? I think we've addressed this question a number of times before, so I don't want to go back into the details of this. Intimacy between two people is, as I've said numerous times already, is a spiritual act as much as a physical act. To get that close to another being, to open yourself up to them, isn't just and I don't want to say in a crass way. It's not just about going under the sheets together. You really have to open yourself up completely to the person. Now, in a previous discussion, I've spoken about the act of sex, and I've spoken about it at 3 levels, 3 types of sex. I'm not talking about 3 different positions or anything silly like that. You get the first type where basically it's body and not mind. This is kind of what a prostitute would do. That's the kind of a sex that a prostitute would have. They just go through the motion, but they're not engaged mentally or emotionally. They just are there in body. Now, I'm not trying to say that when that happens in a marriage, that's prostitution. I don't mean that in the least. But sex can often be at that level. You just go through the motions to keep your spouse happy, and often to keep them at bay. You don't want to get too close to your spouse, so you just sort of give them what they need, their physical desire, hoping that they'll just leave you alone now. There's that type of sex. The other type of sex is anxiety sex, where people have intimacy to basically make them less anxious, to be calmer. Now, this is a real problem, this type of sex, and most people are stuck at this. I'm going to call it level 2. And they get stuck at this because of this following reason. I'll give a scenario. Many women, also men, have body image problems. They're not happy with their bodies, and they don't have self-worth. Society teaches that. The advertising industry, the clothing industry, the film industry, everything around you tells you that you look ugly, that you have not got the right shape. And not only that, then they tell you if you had the right shape, if you look the right way, everybody would be attracted to you. You could find a partner. And in fact, which is so sad, I've spoken to people that have said, I'm too old, and the person wasn't even 30. They have the person already slept with somebody, and so they had felt that they were the way they expressed it. I think most of us can have empathy with this idea. They were used goods, and so they said it was a sister. Unfortunately, said most men, they don't mind having those relationships with you when it's not marriage, but when it comes to marriage, what they would want is someone young and who's a virgin. And this was all about body image problems, and it is really, really sad. And this is a lot of this level 2 sex where it's anxiety, where someone would say to their partner, well, if you really loved me, then you would have sex with me. And the fact that you are refusing sex indicates that you don't love me. So they put this emotional pressure on, and people feel anxious, and they feel that their acceptance or their self-worth is based upon the fact of sleeping with their partner. That can happen outside of courtship, it can happen in courtship, and it happens far too frequently in marriage. The third type of sex is sex as God designed it to be: mind, body, spirit, all engaged. It's an altogether more pleasurable experience because it just works right. And what I'm saying is that sex outside of marriage, it's very difficult to reach that level of intimacy outside of marriage. God just didn't design human interaction to be that way. I do want to just make one point. When we say outside of marriage, when we have to define what marriage is the union of a man and a woman. And in many ways, we've already spoken about this. Marriage is a ritual. It's a certain day where you get dressed up in a certain way and you say some statements to one another. And then the next day, or just afterwards, you're considered to be married. And before, you're not considered to be married. So just want to make sure that we understand that the concept of marriage is in and of itself a peculiarly human phenomena. Is going back to an ex-partner who you thought you should break up with in your conservatism and wrong ideas of love wrong? So I don't fully understand the context. So the person then gave some context to expand that my ex was not an SDA, but was happy to marry me and know more of God. But I ended the relationship as I returned to conservative Seventh-day Adventism and was told and believed that it was the best thing to do. So when it says an ex, the context of this question is not someone who was married, but it was someone that the person was either in courtship with, or they were contemplating to enter into a courtship. They were an Adventist. The person wasn't an Adventist. And they were advised not to marry the person because they weren't an Adventist. That was the first marker or the first tick box. They're not Adventist, consider someone else. But the person says that this person that they liked was really nice. Everything was good. Did the Adventist, now that they understand more about, I'm guessing, equality and everything that they're learning about our new way of relationships, they're asking a question: was that wise counsel that they had received before? Should they first of all have broken up? And secondly, having broken up, is it okay now to go back to this ex-partner or ex-potential partner, assuming that they're not already taken, not already in a relationship? Is it okay to go back to them now that our perspective of, I guess, priests, Levites, and Nephilims is a bit more relaxed? I'm trying to put words into this person's mouth to try to get some more context of what I think that they mean. So I guess my answer is pretty straightforward on this, that you should only consider marrying someone who is a priest. To say it simply, you should only be contemplating marrying someone who's an Adventist. Adventism is obviously not enough. So what I'm saying is, this is not an issue of conservative Adventism. This is a principle that I think is correct and true and right, that we should only marry people who are in the same faith as us, who has the same beliefs as us. This becomes really important, especially if you have children, which some people say, well, we won't have children, but sometimes you have children even by accident, maybe even it was an unplanned pregnancy. It becomes extremely problematic to marry someone who's not of your faith. And this then too would expand to the idea where we say that you should only be marrying priests, people in the movement. You shouldn't be marrying even Seventh-day Adventists who view or see things differently. If you're not sure about that, I suggest that this person, obviously it's a rhetorical statement, should go and speak to the person that we mentioned before about not speaking with their spouses. Something has gone wrong. And far too many times, the reason why people have a breakdown in the relationship is not just that they don't know how relationships work, it's because they have nothing in common. And I think you should speak to people who are already in relationships where the spouses have different beliefs, and it becomes a painful, lonely experience for both of them. And it really isn't pleasant. There are far too many people that I know. And when I say I know, most of the people that I know are in the movement. And they will tell me that they are more lonely in their marriage than they were when they were single. And when they were single, the only thing they lived, breathed, dreamt about was being in a relationship and being happy because they were lonely outside of marriage, being single. And now they're married and the communication has dried up. They've got nothing in common with their spouse. Something has gone wrong, or something was always wrong and they refuse to see it. Now they realize what true loneliness is when you're in a relationship and you cannot communicate with your spouse, where you feel constrained to express your thoughts and your feelings. Ellen White has said that courtship is an exercise in deception. And I think that is so true, far truer than most people will acknowledge. And what I mean by that is the following. A superficial reading of that statement will indicate that you're marrying someone who's not nice. And what you need to do is marry someone or choose someone who is nice. Therefore, you would not have a deceptive courtship. But I don't believe that's what Ellen White meant. I think what she actually is referring to is the very essence of courtship. A premarital relationship, on whatever ground do you want to think about it, is an exercise in deception. And the only type of relationship that you can be sure that you're not being deceived in before you marry is the following one. What you need to do is, I'll make it sound ugly, then I'll say it in a much nicer way. You need to shack up with your partner, which means you need to cohabit, live with them for 2 years before you marry them. That way, you would know for certain who and what you're marrying. The problem is, we would not be prepared to do that because we would see that living that way, we would call it living in sin. And I agree it is. I'm not suggesting that we do that, but I am saying anything short of doing that, anything short of actually living with someone as though you're married for an extended period of time, you will always enter into a relationship that is based upon deception. And the deception is that you do not give an honest and open portrayal of who and what you are. And you don't even do that deliberately. Why is that important with respect to this question? It's because of this. When you are in courtship and you're going to go out for a date, maybe you call it something different. You might call it a Sabbath afternoon walk. I just call it what it is. You go for a date with your partner, and what will you do? You will either put on some perfume or deodorant. You will shower first. You will shave. You will wear your best clothes. You will tidy up so that you look and smell clean. When you're married, you won't do that. You won't have the opportunity to do that. You'll come home all hot and sweaty, and or you'll both come home, wherever your marital dynamic is, and you'll have to meet and show affection to one another in your sorry state. You won't have an opportunity to fix yourselves up. You'll meet each other in all different circumstances. You'll have to wash one another's dirty underwear. You'll have to meet each other first thing in the morning, and sometimes that is not a pretty sight. So what I'm saying about all of that is the person that you meet or that you think you know before marriage is not the person that you will marry, that you won't be when you're married. The second point is, often through courtship, people are still have this phenomena which Ellen White calls lovesick sentimentalism, and we're still driven to be physically attracted to the person, and often we go too far. We have some kind of physical contact with them, and we let our guard down. All of these are dangerous because you're not thinking straight, and you'll enter into a marriage that you're not suited to. So I think it's sensible. I think it's wise counsel not to marry someone who is not of the faith that you are of. They may seem nice, they may seem good. My question is, if they're so good, if they're so nice, how can it be that you have a completely different perspective of what's important in life? Because if you're part of this movement, you are seriously committed to your walk with God. I mean, just to be a member of this movement, to have left society, to have left Adventism, to see things in this radically different way, to have gone through all the ups and downs, to have gone through all of that and stayed here, you must be committed, far more committed than the average person. And if you're going to marry someone who isn't even is not an Adventism, or is an Adventist and has rejected things about this movement, I think you're just asking for trouble that you don't want. And that trouble will worsen when you get married. So I think the counsel, as far as I understand it, is don't be unequally yoked. This is the biblical term that's used. And I still think that is the correct and proper counsel for each of us to follow today. Don't marry someone who's not in the faith. It's not worth it. It's far too risky.
It's one of the previous questions.
If your former partner remarries, does that count as them committing adultery, affording you the right to remarry? You separate because of abuse, irreconcilable differences. Your spouse remarries or has a relationship with somebody. Does that free you up to remarry? The technical answer is yes. If you just look at the maths, just look at the principle, the law, yes, you're free to remarry. However, I think it can be more complex than that, because sometimes you can force your partner out of a relationship and push them into a place where they end up committing sin, which they wouldn't have done, all things being equal. And I think if some of the blame for that broken relationship lies with you, it's not as clean cut to say that now you're completely free to go ahead and remarry. Sometimes some of that blame can be still placed upon your shoulders, the blame for actually causing your spouse to commit adultery. So the legal answer is yes, of course you're free. That's the words. But if you delve a bit deeper, I think sometimes you may find yourselves in problems. Me, I don't read the heart. I'm not God. So I'll just follow the rules. If the rules say this, this, and this, you can remarry. But you could find yourself in difficulty with respect to God's eyes. So I would be cautious about marriage breakups and pushing your spouse out, shutting down on them because you're tied with them, in the hope that they will leave, in the hope that they will find another partner and that you will be free. God reads the heart. He knows the motives why we do things. So I'd be careful about that. So this is a question from a couple of weeks ago. As I described oral sex as sodomy, sodomy being a very common negative word, seems to me that you might be already labeling oral sex as bad, even though you said it is not. I'm not actually making any statement about whether it's wrong or whether it's right. So let me just, this is part one of the question. So I'm saying the dictionary definition of sodomy is any kind of sexual act, whether it's oral or anal, and it's not just regular sex. All of that is considered sodomy. It's a dictionary definition of that. So that's the first point. And even though the word sodomy has this very negative connotation, I'm not labeling oral sex as having some negative connotation. I gave no judgment about my thoughts on oral sex, and I don't intend to give any of my personal opinion on that. This is an adult discussion, and the only people that should be engaging in any of these acts are married couples, and they should be able to work out between themselves what their position on oral sex is. If they feel comfortable or if they don't need my advice to tell them if it's right or wrong to do that. I'm just giving the dictionary definition, and I'm not trying to tell people that it's right or wrong to enter into that activity. But I was just telling people when they talk about sodomy, what it actually means. Second part of the question, can you work through the Bible or whatever, the way might, or the way that I might prove how and why oral sex is sodomy? I don't need to go to the Bible to do that. I just need to go to a dictionary. You go to a dictionary and you can understand what the word sodomy is. Now, the city of Sodom wasn't called Sodom because they were all committing sodomy, and sodomy was homosexuality. It didn't work that way. There was just a city called Sodom. The word Sodom, as portrayed in the Bible of this as this city, has got nothing to do with homosexuality. The homosexuality got attached to the word Sodom, got turned into the act of sodomy, because there is a story in the book of Genesis about what happened in a place called Sodom, where there was this sexual act that it didn't actually happen, but that tried to happen. And those men that wanted intercourse with the visitors, the two men, the angels, because they wanted to commit what appears to be a homosexual act, that act gets attached to the name of the city, and thereby sodomy is connected to homosexuality. We need to get things the right way round. So I don't need to go through the Bible and to do a word search or to prove that the word sodomy means oral sex. I don't need to do that, because that's the wrong way of approaching the problem. I'm hoping that the questioner understands what I'm saying. The definition of sodomy is any kind of sexual act that uses the mouth or the anus. The fact that the city was called Sodom, and sodomy is normally considered just to be an act of homosexuality between two men may be what some people think, but there is no dictionary definition based from the scriptures. If you go to the Old Testament and look at the word Sodom, you won't look up the Hebrew word of Sodom and say, oh, it means homosexual. It doesn't work that way. So I can't prove it because it's unprovable. It's not the right way of actually approaching the question or the subject. You also said that sodomy is not only related to homosexuality, but to oral sex. Of course, because it's the dictionary definition. Follow on question. But we know we're not yet in the time to say or to prove whether homosexuality is good or not. Again, relating it to a strong word that has a very negative connotation. That's why I'd like if you could show why sodomy is that, at least a part of oral sex. So the person's question is basically that because sodomy is so closely attached to homosexuality, they want me to use a different word. So if you want me to use a different word, such as oral sex, that's fine. I don't mind using a different word. But then I would also use anal sex. If you're going to use anal sex, then there is no need to use the word sodomy anyway. Sodomy is just another phrase for saying either anal or oral sex. There's no difference between the two. If a person has a problem on connotation, then they could choose to use a word in their conversation, something else. So I guess I'm reticent to pull away from using the word as it's defined in a modern dictionary. Next question. In a previous class, me, Parminder, said that Ellen White had some kind of a wrong perspective on masturbation. It sounded like if the healthiness or unhealthiness of masturbation was not clear for Ellen White. May you clarify on that? You can give a brief perspective on how we should view masturbation as a movement. Well, I'm just going to give you my perspective. I don't want to claim this is a movement perspective. On prophetic issues, I think we would be talking about something different when we talk about what the movement's position is on something. So my position on a reading on a subject or an issue such as this, I don't think is a movement position. It's my personal position as, I'm just going to say as a person, if you want to say as an elder. I don't think even that is really the right way to say it. Ellen White will tell you basically that you can pick up many diseases of the lungs, diseases of the mind. You can go end up being in a mental institution if you masturbate. She doesn't use the word masturbate. She uses the word secret vice. She doesn't confine it to men. She also includes women in that, which is an interesting thing because I think most people think that this is a problem that men or young men have and that women don't. If you look at modern statistics will show you, I think the numbers are around this kind of figure. 90% of men, I'm going to say under 30 or whatever, I don't know what the exact time age is, have masturbated, like a huge percentage, like 90%. And women, it's in the high to mid 80s. So this is not, if I want to call it a problem or a phenomena, this is not a phenomena that men have or a problem that men have. This is a non-gender specific issue about masturbation. And I'm going to suggest that Ellen White says it in that framework that men and women are doing this thing. What I'm saying is that Ellen White's perspective of this was taken from her own generation. The perspective that doctors had in the Victorian age is that masturbation would hurt you or damage you. And this was based upon a phenomena called vital force. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't such a thing as vital force. It's a phrase or a term that Ellen White uses in a number of contexts, and therefore I'm reticent to say that the concept that she uses is wrong. The term that she uses may not be helpful, because the term vital force is a term that's used in the New Age movement often, and for them it could mean something different. Often the term, as I understand it, vital force means that when you're born, you're given a measure of life or a measure of vital force. And what you do is you just eat away at that vital force as you go through your life. Now, the reason why there may be some truth in that is today, science wouldn't use the term vital force, but they may use the phrase or the term telomere length. Now, I don't know if you've, I'm not an expert on the subject, but I'm not sure how many of you are aware of something that's in our bodies. It's part of our, I think, our DNA structure. They're called telomeres. And if I can consider it in a simple way, if you have a pair of shoes and you have shoelaces, they would be like shoelaces. And you know that after a while, the little plastic on the end of your shoelaces will break down and deteriorate. It comes off, and what begins to happen to your shoelace? They become threadbare, and they begin to sort of unravel. And as they unravel, you tend to cut the unraveled bit, and then they unravel more. And eventually, if you had shoes that lasted long enough, your shoelaces would basically get so short they would no longer work. And this is how telomeres work. Scientists believe that you have a fixed length of your telomeres, and they shorten depending on how you live, on lifestyle issues, lifestyle choices. And I guess that is a scientific model for vital force. You have a set amount of telomere length, and you can shorten it depending on how you eat, how you live, what you do. If you live at a fast pace, whatever fast pace means, you'll shorten your telomeres quicker. Just a little health nugget. If you cook your food, which I think most of us do, I'm not saying to eat raw, but the way you cook your food has an impact on telomere length, because it changes the structure of your food, and the way your food is structured can affect telomere length. And the safest way to cook your food is to steam or boil it. If you use Fahrenheit, don't take your food above 212 Fahrenheit, that's boiling point. If you use Celsius, it's 100 degrees C. So every time you bake things, you all know that you don't bake at 100 degrees or at 212. In the Fahrenheit system, you bake around 300, 350. If you bake on Celsius, it's 200, 250, 160. It's a lot higher than boiling temperature. And you change the chemical structure of your food, and that food ends up having properties to it which shorten your telomere length quicker than boiling does. I'm not saying don't eat baked food, and just making a point there. So Ellen White believes that masturbation is going to affect your vital force, shorten your lifestyle, damage you. And that just basically is not true. There is no evidence, and it's been researched a lot, that masturbation causes you physical harm in that way. Now, that is not to say that it's healthy to let your imagination run away with you and think all manner of corrupting thoughts, if I can say it that way, or to look at pornography. Also, the other problem with masturbation, it purely, when you masturbate yourself, it's a pure expression of self-pleasure, and an orgasm, which is what the end result of masturbation is. That's normally the goal of that. If it was an unpleasurable experience, people wouldn't participate in it. They want that pleasurable experience. That's meant to be in a relationship with another human being. It wasn't meant to be done by yourself. So masturbating yourself is not healthy because it's an exercise of selfishness, self-gratification, and the mental gymnastics that you need to go through can be unhealthy. But in a healthy relationship, I can't see any reason why it would be wrong to do that. In fact, if you go back to the former question, oral sex is essentially masturbation. It's a form of masturbation. Basically, I think anyone who looks at her writings candidly comes to the conclusion that her statements on masturbation were just not accurate. Now, people will target one issue. When it comes to men masturbating, we know, it's been verified, that sperm, not just sperm, but the whole package, so the sperm and all the fluid that it surrounds it is very high in zinc, and it's easy to lose a large amount of zinc if you have sex or masturbate on a regular basis, if you ejaculate on a frequent basis. And there has been some level of research that says people with low zinc levels can end up having mental problems. But to suggest that masturbation will make you mad, making that connection, which is what conservative Adventists tried to do when that research came out, they said, oh, this proves it, I think I think we're all consenting adults here. I think it's plain foolishness to try to defend Ellen White's position to say that you're going to lose some zinc because you ejaculated and that's going to make you mad. I think he's really stretching things. In fact, there is so much evidence that couples with a healthy sex life, when coming to the men, they live longer. They don't have shorter lives. They are healthier and happier. Doesn't make you mental. It makes you more balanced. I'm not saying this is your license to masturbate. It is not. I think self-masturbation is unhealthy for other reasons, not the ones that Ellen White gives. At least not the primary ones. It doesn't shorten your life and make you mental. Is it necessary to be physically attracted to someone for courtship to take place? Yes. My understanding, my position, my thoughts on this is it is absolutely necessary that this person that you are physically attracted to them. This should not be a concern to anybody, because in this world of 7 billion people, 200 priests, whatever number you want to come up with, there is someone that will find you physically attractive. People shouldn't worry overly much about age or body shape, body type, or the way their face looks. If you're like someone else, some elder in the movement, won't say who, if you're like that elder, you will not think much about your body. When you look at yourself in the mirror, you might think, wow, you look a mess. It's normal. Everybody thinks that way. But there's something unique about human beings. Women who have insecurities about how they look, they will find a man who finds them attractive. And they'll say, oh, I think my eyes don't look right, or there's a problem with my ears. The man will say, looks good to me, and vice versa. Body shape is really something that's in the eye of the beholder. People prefer different types of body shapes. And again, I want to reiterate that I don't think there's a one size fits all for one person. Any particular person, I think they can find attractiveness in a range of body types, a range of skin colors, hair colors, heights, ages. I don't think there's this rigidity that people think there is, but it is necessary to be physically attracted to somebody. We can either call it a spark of electricity or chemistry or something in a twinkle in the eye, whatever you want to call it. We know when we have that. You look at somebody and something begins to happen. Your heart races when they look back at you with that smile, that special smile, and something happens. It's essential. I think people are kidding themselves that it's not. I think it's going to be my last question. Is everything else, if everything else is in place, both of you are great friends, but you do not have the physical attraction, should that relationship be left as a friendship? Yes, I think it should be left as a friendship. If you're not physically attracted to one another, I want to suggest that in this particular question, what actually is happening is one of you is physically attracted, not both of you. If you're both not physically attracted, I don't think you're going to actually even think, oh, perhaps we should marry. You're going to say, I think we should just stay platonic friends. It's all good. The reality of this question is one of you actually is attracted to the other person, but that attraction is not reciprocated. And that's what the problem is. I think that's the vast majority of situations in something like this. Because if I wasn't attracted to you and you were not attracted to me, why would we ever think that we want to get married? Is it because we're both on good jobs? We both are doctors. We both like walking. If that was the criteria, can you imagine how silly that would be? I have a passion for food. You have a passion for food. Oh, let's marry. The problem is 100 people in this movement all like food. In fact, we all like food. If you use that criteria, I could right now get all the list of everybody that's in this movement. If you're single, put your names in a hat, take your names out and pair you up straight away. Easy. But we know it doesn't work like that. Because if you talk about what you're interested in, the thing that makes all of us, the thing that we all have in common is we're all in this movement. I like walking. You don't like walking. That's fine. I don't walk 24 hours a day. But I'm really interested in this movement. I'm really interested in leaving this planet. My walk with God is number one, and as it is with all of you. And if that's the case, you should be able to marry anybody, pretty much. It's not true that physical attraction is unimportant. And I'm suggesting in this question, one of you likes the other person, but it's that feeling is not mutual. And in that case, I don't think you should. I say to this sister, you know, I really like you. You're attractive. You turn me on. It's all good. And she says, you know, I really like you as a friend. I like your mind. You're a good man, but I just don't find you physically attractive. I would say, you know what? You can learn to love me. You can learn to be attracted and to me. And that's what too many people do. I think that is bad counsel. I think both people need to find one another physically attractive. You need to be turned on by the person. If you're not, move on. In the same way that both of you need to be in the movement. If you're not, move on. I really think it is that simple. I maybe answer this one question. I've got a couple of minutes. I did that one quite quickly. Assuming that a couple feels ready for a child, so they're married, they want a child, what are the common pitfalls that you have found in having children? The number one pitfall in having children is that people are not ready. It's as simple as that. So it's an assumption that they feel that they're ready to have children. And I'm saying they're not ready to have children. The only people that are ready to have children are people that have already had children and they're about 60 years old and the children are all grown up, perhaps in their 40s, married with grandchildren. They've gone through all of that. I think now they're probably ready to have children to actually make a reasonable good job of it. Everyone else, I don't think they're really ready to have children. So that's the first point I want to make. That is the number one pitfall, that we are not trained to be parents. We've had no we've had no training, and what's worse, that you're not ready to be married either, because you've had no training. And the best people to marry are people who already have gone through it, at least a couple of times, perhaps. So try and find someone who's been married 2 or 3 times, and they know what they're doing. You'll be married 2 or 3 times, and you can probably get on well. You probably have a good idea of how marriage works. So, unfortunately, it's all hit and miss for being married, because we're all novices, and having children, we're all novices. We don't know what we're doing. That's the number one pitfall. However, we can all read about it, learn about it, do some preparation, and make the best. This is a bad way to say it. We can make the best of a bad deal. Our biggest problem is that we don't understand the rules of how human beings are put together. We don't even understand how to manage people. Primarily, we don't understand how to manage ourselves. We don't understand what we need ourselves. We project too much. The way you were brought up, mostly, when you get married and you have your own children, you will either unwittingly repeat the same mistakes, but you will also try to bring up your children in the opposite way to which you were brought up. So if you were brought up a spoilt child and you saw how that damaged you, you will bring up your child strict. If you were brought up strict and it damaged you, you weren't happy, you will try to bring up your child in a more open and less strict fashion. We always try to tend to do the opposite, and we end up making mistakes. The number one pitfall in having children, besides the ones that I've already mentioned, is not understanding the needs of a child. It's easy. Number one need of any human being is the same need that God has. It's to be loved, to have care and affection. And far too often, parents are unwilling to give that to their children. They think they are, but they're not. This is the big problem with courtship. You think you're going to be able to give this, your future partner, your spouse, the care and attention that they need. But essentially, all you do is you fancy them. Once you've been in bed with them 20, 30, 50, 100 times, the novelty wears away. And then you're left with the monotony of life, and love dries up, it dies. And that's the pitfall of marriage. It's the same pitfall that you have with children. They're all nice when they're young, a little cute baby, but as they grow up into their, most people call it the troublesome twos, which is a really horrible term when you think about it. And they have all these derogatory terms as the child grows up. Troublesome teens, all of that. We have this whole wrong perspective of having children. The number one need that children have is to be loved. Pitfalls, we discipline them in the wrong way because we have a wrong model of how to train animals. The reason I say train animals is because it's a slip of the tongue, because I'm going to talk about animals. We have a wrong idea of how to train children. But if you've got pets, we know how to train pets. To train a dog to do something, essentially, you bribe them to do their work. You give them positive incentive to do something. We don't like the word bribery, but we like the term positive incentives. And we're very reticent to do that because too many of us believe in bringing up children in the spirit. People call it parenting in the spirit, that you have this magic connection with the Holy Spirit. And I'm suggesting it is pretty magical. And we try to project that onto our children and make them have this special relationship with the Holy Spirit. And in far too many situations, this is will worship. And it really is an unhealthy way to bring up children. This is why atheists who have a level-headed brain who love their children can bring up children who are balanced, respectful and decent human beings, and why far too often Adventists, conservative Adventists, have children who are wild and out of control. It's not because Satan is attacking your child. It's because you don't know how to bring up children properly, because you're using the wrong methodology. You're using the wrong principles. So the biggest pitfalls often is we just don't know how to bring up children. We don't know the fundamental principles of human nature, and we apply wrong methodology to the bringing up of our children. So I've answered that question, hopefully to people's satisfaction. We've run out of time. It's been a real blessing to study with you. Just want to remind people, some people came in late today. For the next 3 Sabbaths, that's, I think, the 12th, the 20th, the 12th, the 19th, and the 26th, the next 3 Sabbaths. So all the remaining Sabbaths of September, there will be no Q&As on Sabbath, our Sabbath afternoon here in the UK, British Standard Time, because I'm doing camp meetings all through those 3 weekends. Next weekend is a camp meeting that's geared up. When I say geared up, this is the timing. Anybody, if I don't know how the numbers work or anything, because I'm not the host, but if the numbers fit, I don't think that people would mind you joining them. But I'm not the host, so I can't speak for the host. Next week, time-wise, it's geared up for the African continent, particularly Southern Africa. The following week, it's for Oceania. That's a camp meeting for Fijian time. And the third week, that's for the American continent, and that's geared up. I think it's called Pacific time, which is the time in California. So that's where they're all geared up for. As I say, I can't answer for the host masters if there are places going to be available, but if there are and you're willing to, and those times are okay, that's what I'm going to be doing for the next 3 weekends. And so therefore there won't be a Q&A. We'll come back in October, depending on my situation, if I'm still here. I don't know what's going to happen into October. I suspect I will still be here doing the classes, and we'll see if we carry on with these presentations on courtship and marriage, or we move on to prophetic subjects. I know some people have had their fill of relationships and they want to move on to prophetic subjects, but maybe I've still got a fair few questions left, and there may still be a large group of people who are desirous of continuing these presentations. Anyway, I hope that's a blessing to you all. Let's close with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, I want to give you praise and thanks for your goodness and your mercy towards us. Lord, as we consider the thoughts and ideas that have entered into our hearts and in our minds during these sacred hours, we want to pray that they would be used to guide and direct us in the paths of righteousness. I pray, Lord, that you would bless us, that you would guide us and direct us in our relationships one with another. Father, we know that this is why we became Christians. This is why we desire to go to heaven, is to have proper relationships with one another and also with you. As we realize the true purpose of life, may each of us, however broken we may feel, however lonely we may feel, desire to have better relationships with those people who we know, friends or family, and that we would learn more about you. Be with us and bless us. To this end we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you once again, Elder Parminder.
Farewell, everybody.
Farewell and God bless.